The Nigerian Senate has passed the 2021 to 2023 Medium-Term Expenditure Framework and Fiscal Strategy paper, approving a benchmark of $40 per barrel for the price of crude. This, among other resolutions, was reached on Wednesday after a debate on the report of the Joint Committees on Finance and National Planning on the 2021-2023 MTEF-FSP by Senator Adeola Solomon. Some of the recommendations passed include the production of 1.97 million barrels of crude per day, as well as an exchange rate of 379 to the dollar. The lawmakers also adopted an expected gross domestic product growth rate of 3%, and inflation rate was pegged at 11.9%.
But for this purpose, Mr. President, I have the report of the Medium-Term Expenditure Framework and the Fiscal Strategy paper, which 1.0 has to do with the introduction. The Senate, at a sitting of Tuesday, 21st July 2020, considered the request of Mr. President, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria on the 2021-2023 Medium-Term Expenditure Framework (MTEF) and Fiscal Strategy paper, and referred same to the Committee on Finance and National Planning and Economic Affairs, with the Committee on Finance as the lead committee for further legislative action. The background, which has to do with 2.0, has to do with what MTEF is all about, and in compliance with Section 10B of the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2007 and 2007. We also have Section 11, subsection 2 of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which is reliable and consistent to the fiscal outlook of the MTEF that was submitted before the National Assembly. Under 3.0, we have the membership of the committee that were part of the consideration of the MTEF and the Fiscal Strategy paper. And that goes to page 4 of the document. We also have the method that was adopted in consideration of this medium-term expenditure framework and the Fiscal Strategy paper. And the MDAs that were invited by the committee. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the MDAs that were invited are categorized into three: those that are funded by the budget, those that are partially funded, and those that are fully funded from the federal budget. But in page 6, we have the list of all agencies of the government that were invited for the consideration of the MTEF FFP document submitted before the National Assembly. Mr. President, that goes to page 8. And on page 9, I have the 2020 budget implementation. Mr. President, the financial year 2020 started with some subdued optimism for global growth due to the downward revision of growth projection attributable mainly to the negative surprises to the economic activities in a few emerging market economies. The subdued optimism has been further intensified by the Saudi Arabia oil price war and the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. The revenue outturns for 2020, the oil revenue, following the revision of the key parameters of the 2020 budget necessitated largely by the COVID-19 pandemic, gross oil and gas revenue was revised downward to 3.03 trillion from 7.67 trillion for the year 2020. As at May, 1.99 trillion was realized out of the prorated sum of 1.62 trillion. This represents 57.4 more than the prorata after netting out deduction, including 13% derivation. Net oil and gas revenue inflows to the Federation account amounted to 1.5 trillion as against 57.66 billion or 66.1%.
In a remark, the President of the Senate, Ahmed Lawan, urged committees on finance and national planning to endeavor to meet with government agencies on a quarterly basis to check their performance. He also warned on the need to minimize borrowing so as not to end up using the nation's resources for debt servicing.
This is indeed what we expected, having a committee that is so populated with professionals, with senators determined to ensure that we did the right thing, particularly when it comes to revenue generation and the remittances. We need to work so hard to meet the kind of expectations, especially for funding of our development in the country, for the budget. But there are so many issues that were so obvious during the deliberations. First of all, revenue generation itself. Now that so many more agencies of government have been brought in, I think there is a need for our Committee on Finance particularly to closely monitor the meeting of targets by these agencies. Before the COVID, we had an idea of a quarterly meeting with all the revenue generating agencies of government on a quarterly basis to review where they will be, their performances, to see how close or how they have been able to achieve their targets. Now that COVID is easing, and of course we still have to be careful not to be complacent, I think we should come back with that idea. We need to put up a lot of effort to ensure that these revenue generating agencies do their work promptly, efficiently, and effectively. And where they have challenges, we should face the challenges. Because, like most of us here said, borrowing needs to be carefully applied here. There are projects that I feel we should ensure that we don't borrow. We should explore the other opportunities in sourcing of funding, the BOT, the build, operate, and transfer, the public-private partnerships, and so many other options. I think we should explore on those so that we minimize the borrowing. There are a lot of countries or a lot of businesses that have interest in our infrastructure and the development of our infrastructure. So we should explore the other means. But then again, we cannot eliminate borrowing. That is the sad part of it, because in the past, I think we deluded ourselves thinking Nigeria is the richest country in the world. Meanwhile, we are not developing our infrastructure. Because if we had applied whatever we had before, especially in our good days and good years, we would have found out that we wouldn't have any money to spare and call ourselves rich. Because there were much more challenges on the side of developing the infrastructure than what we were getting. But we squandered our riches in those very good days. Now that we realize that all our contemporaries then are now somewhere far away from us in terms of development, we are trying to catch up. So we have to mix borrowing with diversification of how we go about funding our development needs. The deficit, of course, is high, and this is telling us the story or the history of our economic journey. We simply could not figure out the right things to do when we had plenty of it. We didn't save for the rainy day. Now we are in a rainy day, very rainy day, that umbrella cannot stop the rain beating everyone. So we need to look at the possibility of reducing the kind of borrowing we do in order to ensure that we don't accumulate so much deficit and end up spending so much of our revenue servicing the debt. Cost of governance, and especially whenever we talk of cost of governance, we think of how to merge the different agencies. I think there is need for us to master the political will, because we know what to do, but when it comes to doing the right thing, we find it difficult to do it. But I think the time has come for government to, and government includes us, to address this issue